Imagine standing in a room full of people you've known your entire life, wearing your best clothes and holding a glass of champagne, only to have the person you grew up with look you dead in the eye and tell the entire world that you were never wanted, while your own parents cover their mouths to hide their laughter. That is exactly what happened to me last weekend, and I'm still shaking as I sit here trying to process how my entire reality shifted in a single moment of a wedding toast. And honestly, I need to know, was I wrong for how I chose to burn it all down after that? I mean, what would you do if the people who were supposed to love you most treated your very existence like a cruel joke in front of 100 guests? This story doesn't start at the wedding, though. It starts years and years ago, in a house where I always felt like I was walking on eggshells while my sister, Sarah, walked on a red carpet. Sarah is 3 years older than me, and for as long as I can remember, she was the golden child, the one whose every sneeze was treated like a symphony, while my greatest achievements were met with a distracted nod. My parents, Robert and Diane, weren't overtly abusive in the way you see in movies, but there was always this subtle, chilling distance between them and me that never existed with Sarah. I remember bringing home a straight-A report card and being told to put it on the fridge myself because they were busy helping Sarah pick out a dress for a middle school dance. I remember breaking my arm in the backyard and being told to stop crying because Sarah had a headache and I was being dramatic. I grew up thinking I was just the difficult child, the one who didn't quite fit the aesthetic of our perfect suburban family, but I never imagined the reason was something so much darker than simple favoritism. Throughout my childhood, the signs were everywhere. If there was a family vacation, Sarah got the window seat and I was squeezed in the middle. If there was a birthday, Sarah's was a month-long celebration while mine was a cake from the grocery store and a reminder that we're saving up for Sarah's equestrian lessons. My father, Robert, was a man of few words for me, but with Sarah, he was a fountain of praise, constantly telling her she was the pride of the family. My mother, Diane, was even worse. She would look at me with this strange expression of regret, as if I were a stain on a white rug that she just couldn't scrub out. I spent my teenage years trying to be invisible just to avoid the stinging realization that my presence seemed to annoy them. I took up hobbies that kept me out of the house, joined every after-school club possible, and stayed in the library until closing time just so I wouldn't have to feel the heavy silence of the dinner table, where I was only spoken to when I was being told to pass the salt or clear Sarah's plate. I remember one specific night during my senior year of high school when I won a prestigious scholarship. I came home beaming, ready to finally see a spark of pride in their eyes, but they were in the middle of a heated discussion about which luxury car to buy Sarah for her graduation. When I tried to share my news, my dad didn't even look up from the brochure. He just said, "That's nice, but can you go to the kitchen? You're blocking the light." That was the moment I realized I wasn't just second best. I was practically invisible. It felt like I was a ghost haunting my own home, a background character in the Sarah show. As we got older, the gap widened significantly. When Sarah got into an expensive private university, my parents took out a second mortgage to pay for it without a second thought, throwing a massive, going-away party that cost thousands. But when it was my turn, they sat me down and told me that things were tight, and I should look into community college or heavy student loans because they couldn't justify the investment in my degree. They actually used the word investment, as if I were a failing stock. I worked 3 jobs to put myself through school, barista by day, janitor by night, and tutor on the weekends, rarely coming home because the atmosphere was always so heavy with the feeling that I was an intruder. Every holiday was an exercise in misery, watching them dote on her, buying her designer bags and expensive tech while I got socks or a gift card they clearly found at the bottom of a drawer at the last minute. I remember one Christmas when Sarah got a brand new car, and they gave me a used coffee maker that didn't even work. When I pointed it out, my mother said, "Well, you're so independent, we figured you'd fix it." Sarah, meanwhile, blossomed into this high-powered marketing executive who always had to be the center of attention. She met her husband-to-be, Mark, 2 years ago. Mark is a decent guy, if a bit oblivious, coming from a very wealthy and traditional family, the Hamiltons, who value legacy and bloodlines above all else. His parents are the kind of people who own multiple estates and have libraries that smell like old leather and expensive scotch. They are old money, the kind that doesn't just have wealth, but has a reputation to uphold. When they got engaged, my parents went into absolute overdrive. They spent every waking moment planning this wedding of the century, and once again, I was an afterthought. I wasn't even asked to be in the wedding party until the very last second when one of Sarah's bridesmaids dropped out because she couldn't stand Sarah's bridezilla behavior. And even then, Sarah told me I should be grateful to have a seat at the head table. I spent the months leading up to the wedding doing all the grunt work, picking up floral arrangements, dealing with the caterers, and basically acting as an unpaid assistant while Sarah and my mom went to spa days. I was the one who spent 6 hours organizing the seating chart, handwriting place cards, and coordinating with the lighting crew while they drank mimosas and talked about how perfect Sarah's life was becoming. I did it because I thought that maybe, just maybe, if I showed them how much I cared, if I was the perfect sibling and the perfect child, they would finally see me as a real part of the family. I thought this was my chance to earn their love, to finally bridge that cold gap that had existed since the day I was born. The week of the wedding was a nightmare. Sarah treated the staff like garbage and me even worse, snapping her fingers at me to fix her train, find her misplaced lipstick, or run errands across town in the pouring rain. My parents just watched, telling me to not ruin Sarah's big moment whenever I tried to set a boundary. My mother even had the audacity to tell me to try to look less miserable in the family photos because I was bringing down the aesthetic. The night before the wedding, at the rehearsal dinner, I was sat at the far end of the table, near the kitchen doors. While my parents sat with the Hamiltons, laughing and acting like they were members of the royal family, I heard my mother tell Mark's mother that Sarah was her only true joy, and it felt like a physical blow to my chest. I spent that night in my hotel room, crying and wondering what was so wrong with me that my own mother would say that. The day of the wedding was a blur of high tension and Sarah's constant demands. The ceremony was beautiful, held in a cathedral that cost more to rent for an hour than I made in a year, and Mark's family was beaming, clearly proud to be merging with ours. Then came the reception. The venue was a massive ballroom, dripping in white roses and gold leaf, filled with the who's who of the city. The speeches started, and after a few heartfelt words from Mark's best man, it was Sarah's turn. She stood up, looking radiant in her designer gown, and started with the usual fluff about love and family. But then her tone shifted. She looked over at me, a smirk playing on her lips, and said, "I want to give a special shout-out to my little sibling. You know, our parents always told me that I was the one they planned for, the one who completed their lives, while well, you were the happy little accident they spent 20 years trying to apologize for. In fact, Dad used to say you were the unwanted guest who just never learned when to leave the party." I froze, expecting my parents to stand up in outrage or for the room to fall into a shocked silence. Instead, I looked over at my mother and father, and they were leaning into each other, hands over their mouths, shaking with suppressed laughter. It wasn't a look of shock. It was a look of shared, malicious glee. They weren't embarrassed for me. They were in on the joke. The guests were shifting uncomfortably, some laughing nervously and others looking horrified. But the betrayal from my parents was the final blow. I felt the blood drain from my face as I realized that my entire life of being the difficult one wasn't a misunderstanding. It was a coordinated effort by the people who raised me to make me feel small because they truly didn't want me there. My own father looked at me while Sarah was talking and winked, as if to say, "Finally, the truth is out." I felt my heart shatter, then instantly turn into cold, hard ice. All the years of being second best, all the years of feeling like a ghost in my own home, it all made sense. I wasn't imagining it. I was truly the unwanted guest. So that was the situation I was in. I was standing at a head table, humiliated in front of everyone I knew, watching my parents laugh at my existence. Before I tell you how I handled the rest of that night, and the secret I chose to reveal that ended the wedding right then and there, I want you to pause and comment below. What would you have done? Would you have walked out in silence, or would you have made sure they regretted that moment for the rest of their lives? Because I chose the latter. I stood up slowly, the silence in the room growing heavy as I reached for the microphone. Sarah tried to pull it back, laughing off the tension, but I gripped it tight. I looked directly at Mark's very traditional, very conservative parents, who were looking increasingly confused by the humor of my family. I said into the mic, Since we're being so honest about family secrets today, and since I'm apparently the unwanted guest who doesn't know when to leave, I think it's only fair that Mark's family knows the truth about the perfect woman their son just married. I could see the color drain from my mother's face. She knew exactly what I was talking about. You see, a few weeks before the wedding, I had accidentally intercepted a series of emails on the family iPad that my mom hadn't logged out of. It turned out that Sarah hadn't been working late at those marketing conferences. She had been seeing her ex-boyfriend, a guy she never actually got over, for months. I found photos, hotel receipts, and messages where she complained about Mark being boring and stiff, but necessary for the lifestyle and the trust fund. She called him a cash cow and a safety net. And the kicker, the lavish honeymoon Mark's parents paid for a month-long trip to the Maldives was actually a trip she had planned to meet her ex at. She was going to use Mark's money to fly her lover out there and spend his family's wealth on a secret tryst, while Mark was probably sleeping off his jet lag. I even found a spreadsheet she made of Mark's assets and how she would divide them if they divorced after the mandatory 3-year period required by his prenup. Not only that, but I had found out through those same emails that my parents knew everything. They were helping her hide the affair, even helping her delete messages and craft lies to Mark, because they were terrified of losing the financial connection to Mark's wealthy family and the social standing it gave them. My mother had even written an email to Sarah saying, "Just keep him happy until the papers are signed, then you can do whatever you want. We need that Hamilton connection for the firm." They were literally selling their daughter to the highest bidder while she cheated on him. I didn't want to be the one to ruin a marriage, but the moment they laughed at me being unwanted, I realized I owed them no loyalty. I told the entire room about the affair, the secret bank account Sarah had set up to funnel Mark's money into her own private fund, and how my parents were complicit in the whole scam. I described the emails in detail. I mentioned the dates. I mentioned the hotel names. I even mentioned the specific messages where Sarah and my mom joked about how clueless Mark's parents were. I looked Mark in the eye and said, "I'm sorry you were the victim of their greed, Mark. You deserve someone who actually wants you, not just your bank account. And Mom, Dad, I hope the investment was worth it because you just lost your golden ticket." The room went deathly silent. Mark looked like he had been hit by a train, his face going from confusion to absolute devastation. His father stood up, face purple with rage, and demanded to see the proof I mentioned. I pulled out my phone, where I had saved screenshots of every single email, every photo, and every receipt, and handed it to him. He scrolled through it for what felt like an eternity while Sarah started screaming, calling me a liar and a bitter loser. She actually tried to lung at me, but Mark's best man held her back. Then the Hamiltons saw the photo of Sarah with her ex from just 3 days before the wedding, clearly in a compromising position in the back of a car. Mark's father looked at my parents and simply said, "The marriage is annulled. The checks are stopped. Security will escort you and your family out of this building immediately. Do not ever contact us again. Our lawyers will be in touch regarding the recovery of the wedding expenses." The wedding didn't just end. It imploded. It was like watching a building collapse in slow motion. Mark's family walked out in a phalanx of silent fury, taking their legacy and their money with them, leaving Sarah screaming in the middle of the dance floor, her white dress suddenly looking like a shroud. My parents were staring at me with pure, unadulterated hatred, but for the first time in my life, their opinion didn't matter. They lost everything, their reputation, their connection to wealth, and their perfect daughter's future. I didn't stay for the screaming match. I didn't stay to hear them blame me for ruining their lives. I walked out of that ballroom, handed my bridesmaid bouquet to a confused valet, and drove away. I blocked every single one of them, my parents, Sarah, even the cousins who stood by and watched and said nothing. My parents have tried to reach out through distant relatives, calling me a traitor and saying I ruined Sarah's life over a little joke, and that I've destroyed the family's future and reputation. They even had the nerve to ask me to take down the post I made on social media detailing the truth, claiming I was hurting the family name. But the truth is, there was never a family to destroy. There was just a business arrangement and a scapegoat, and I'm done being the scapegoat. Sarah is currently facing a legal nightmare because Mark's family is suing for the wedding costs and fraud, and my parents are facing social exile and financial ruin. They are being forced to sell the house to cover the debts from the wedding they couldn't actually afford once the Hamiltons pulled their support. They lost their country club memberships, their friends, and their dignity. I finally feel free. I realized that being unwanted by people like that is actually the greatest gift they could have ever given me. I lost a family of monsters, but I gained my self-respect, and I've spent the last week rebuilding my life on my own terms without their shadows hanging over me. I've moved to a new city, I'm focusing on my career, and for the first time when I look in the mirror, I don't see an accident. I see a survivor who finally stood up. I've realized that my worth isn't defined by their approval. If they wanted a daughter who would keep their dirty secrets, they shouldn't have treated the one who knew them like trash. I learned that you cannot buy loyalty, and you certainly cannot expect it from someone you've spent a lifetime devaluing. Was I petty? Maybe. But they taught me that family is about more than blood, and since I wasn't wanted in their family, I decided they didn't deserve to have a family at all. I am building a new family now, one made of friends and people who actually see me. Like this video if you think I was right to expose them and show them that actions have consequences, and subscribe if you want to hear more stories about people finally standing up for themselves against toxic relatives. Share your final thoughts on this whole mess in the comments section. Did the punishment fit the crime, or did I go too far by nuking the whole wedding? I'll see you all in the next story.